welcome once again to our Carinine Hour, in which we discuss matters related to the development of our beloved Bahamaland. We've entered into a series to respond to the question, what kind of country are we trying to build in the Bahamas? And we started by looking at the whole concept of democracy, and all of us want to have a democratic country and hope that all of the institutions and the major players in the country would all work towards producing a democratic system in which every person has worth and value, and the whole common order is addressed to bringing worth and value to all members of the society. Last week we looked at the question of law and order, because any society has to have law and order if it is to avoid chaos and anarchy. And the principles upon which we work in the Bahamas to preserve law and order in the society. And today I want to start a two-part series on the economy, what kind of economy we want to build in our Bahamaland. And I have invited as our guest Phil Galanis, who has quite a lot of experience in financial affairs. So welcome once again, Phil. I'm glad that you can come and share with us, and I hope you can enlighten us so that we can help the general populace to come to a better understanding what it is that we are talking about when we talk about the economy of the Bahamas.
Archbishop, thank you very much for inviting me again. It's always a pleasure to be here with you, and I really commend you for these series of presentations. I think it's critically important for Bahamians to understand what our country is, and more importantly, what we want it to be. And I think it's only through media like this that we will be able to have that kind of discourse. And so I think it's very, very commendable, and I thank you for that. When we talk about the economy, we really are referring to two segments or two sectors generally. One is the public sector, and the other is the private sector. The economy is made up of those two sectors principally. There is, of course, in the private sector, businesses, banks and other institutions, insurance companies, hotels, accounting firms, law firms, and so forth. The mom and pop shops, merchants, and retailers. And so they are in the private sector. And generally, the government, which is the other leg of the economy, often looks to the private sector to finance the operation of government through taxation. Generally, that's how it's done. And so when we talk about the economy, generally, we are talking about those activities that will really help to spur economic activity or activity that will generate wealth for our people. And so that essentially is a very, very broad topic, but one that we can zoom in on and narrow in on, narrow our focus, if you will, on some things in particular. When we talk about the economy, let me maybe finish the definition. When we talk about the economy in the Bahamas, we're speaking about three principal sectors. One is the tourism sector, which accounts for approximately 65% of gross domestic product. That's the total amount of goods and services produced, and employs more persons than anyone else in the economy. The second leg of the economy really is the financial services sector, which accounts for about 20% of maybe 25% of gross domestic product. And so you're up to about 85%. And so the other activity that we see in the economy represents about 15% of the total goods and services produced. And that'll be the wide range of activities that we discussed earlier.
Some people are still at a loss when they hear the reference to the GDP. They see it as some abstract thing that is, they believe it doesn't, some say it doesn't make sense, some find it incomprehensible. But we're really talking then about the goods and services that are distributed across the...
That is correct. That's exactly right. It really represents G for good, gross, G for gross, domestic, D for domestic, and P for product, GDP. Really represents the total value of goods and services that an economy produces within an annual period, or it could be a 10-year period, or whatever period you define. And it's an important measure because it helps us to understand the extent to which the economy is expanding or contracting. And so in the Bahamian context, the gross domestic product of approximately $8 billion is really where we are.
That's annual.
That's annual figure. That's an annual figure. That represents the total value of goods and services produced across both the public and the private sector.
And how is that figure arrived at?
That figure is arrived at generally by the central bank and by other agencies such as the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, the IDB. They come together and really refer to a number of sources in the Bahamas, principally the Central Bank of the Bahamas and the Department of Statistics, which conducts surveys from time to time to arrive at that kind of information. The information is not necessarily accurate, precisely accurate, but it's generally accurate. It generally reflects the level of activity in the country. And generally you will hear during the Prime Minister's communication, budget communication in May of each year, the Prime Minister would often say, or rather the Minister of Finance, who happens to be the Prime Minister and has been for quite some time in the past two administrations, the Minister of Finance would normally say that based on estimates of the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, which is really an international agency that monitors financial activity of various countries. And so that is really how those numbers are obtained. And we would like to see our GDP, our gross domestic product, growing, and we want to see it growing at a respectable rate. We've seen it, for example, in the years 2008 to about 2013 or thereabout, we saw a contraction or reduction in GDP across the globe because of the worldwide recession. And so what we would like to see is a respectable rate of growth of about 2 to 3% per annum. That 3% is reasonably good because it shows you that we will be growing at a steady, sustainable rate at which more and more people will be able to participate in the economy, more and more people will be able to generate wealth and income, employment, and other benefits to the society.
And the size of the economy would generally indicate the availability for employment within the economy.
That's exactly right. That's right. Clearly, the more people you have employed, because employment is a factor that goes into the determination of GDP, it means that more people you employ, the higher the GDP. The more people have to spend on consumption goods, on cars, automobiles, houses, and so forth and so on, the more people will be able to travel, the more people will be able to entertain themselves. And so the size of the economy clearly is a reflection of the growth or the status, where we are in the economy compared to where we have been in the past.
And our present level, the GDP, say for last
about $8 billion.
About $8
billion. And that's also important because we tend to look at various other key indicators, such as our debt. The debt to GDP is, what is the amount of debt that we have in the country? Around $5 billion as compared to the gross domestic product. That is like a household saying, for example, how much debt do I have compared to the amount of money I earn? And generally we want to see that around 30 to 35%. For us, it's approaching 60%. For other countries, particularly during the recession, it went up to nearly 100%. Barbados, I think, was at 97%. The United States was over 100%.
Over 100.
And so it's an indicator. It's not a defining variable, but it is clearly an indicator of the way that things are going and the way we'd like to see things develop.
And then you already talked, the important word there is the indicator.
That's correct.
Because it doesn't really exist in itself.
That's right.
It's simply a pointer to...
That's right.
And well, how would you get the ordinary person in the community to appreciate that he or she has a contribution to make in the economy in terms of building the GDP?
Well, that's a very good question, and I think it's a question that has plagued politicians and economists for very, very many years. And perhaps the the most frequently looked at or observed indicator when you're looking at GDP, at gross domestic product, is the level of employment of the people. Our level of employment is at about 86%. In other words, 86% of the people who are employable are working. The other way of putting that is we normally look at it in negative terms. We say 14% are unemployed. That's the other way of looking at it. We look at it as the number of persons who are unemployed as opposed to those who are employed. We would like to see the level of unemployment come down to what economists used to refer to as as no employment, zero employment, which is not zero, quite interestingly enough. It's about 3%, which is what they call no unemployment in an economy. And that has developed over time. But we would like to see people take up some kind of economic activity that will help to produce goods and services, either as craftsmen, as professionals, as tradesmen, as employees, as management persons, as teachers, as ministers of religion, and across the board, to see more and more people engage in activity that's going to contribute to the growth in our gross domestic product. The way that happens is by infusing or developing an atmosphere where economic activity can take place, where it is not difficult to get into business. It's not difficult because, one, the government doesn't make it difficult because of red tape, and two, capital is available, money is available. When our banks do not lend money, it hampers the growth in our gross domestic product. When our government does not remove the red tape from persons being able to access business, that creates a problem as well. And so both of those variables have a tremendously significant impact on the growth and expansion of the economy, and therefore in our gross domestic product.
Good. Well, thanks for that introduction. We've reached the point where we must take our first break, and when we return, we will carry forward from that general description.